Well, looks like everybody's ready. Sully's on the couch. Scout's banging the computer with her tail, and I think we're ready to go. Let's move that down just well. Move your tail. Yes, I know. No one ever pets you. It's a horrible life. Poor cat. Anyway, we're going to talk today. We've talked about some of the things leading up to the beginning of World War One. World War One has already begun as far as we're concerned, but now we're going to talk about how the United States entered into World War One. And so let me share my screen here with my mad skills, and we will talk about that. Okay, let's try that again. There we go. Okay, so we know that World War One began in 1914 following the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who was visiting Sarajevo with his wife. This triggered a set of military alliances where Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, which meant that Germany came into the war on their side. England and France declared war on Germany, and that pulled Russia in on their side, and things went to pieces pretty quickly. Most of Europe had gone to war. There were some neutral countries in 1914, and they included Switzerland, Norway, Sweden, Ethiopia, which is not in Europe, that's in Africa, Mexico, we know where that is, Belgium, Albania, Venezuela, which is in South America, Puerto Rico, which is in the Caribbean, the Netherlands, and the United States. Thank you for that there, Scout. There were sets of alliances, you can see. Italy, Austria, Hungary, and Germany were on the one side. They were referred to as the Triple Alliance. Russia, France, and Britain were on the other side. They were referred to, I'm sorry, the Triple Alliance was England, France, and Russia. The Triple Entente was Germany, Italy, Austria, Hungary. So those were the two different sides. The United States was not involved yet. The U.S. didn't enter the war by committing troops, but they were not completely neutral. They were giving loans, the United States government, and many of the corporations and banks in the United States were giving money to Russia, France, and England. And some of them may have been given money to Germany at that point, because it was always kind of, we're not sure which side we want to go in on. That's why we're not getting in the middle of it yet. I know it seems odd to us now, but at that point, they weren't 100% sure which side they wanted to join in on. They did give loans for the purchase of weapons, ammunition, and supplies for the troops. Pardon me. President Woodrow Wilson, this dude here, actually won re-election in 1916 using the slogan, "He kept us out of war." So it was a big deal. Nobody wanted to go because, we're kind of off over here by ourselves, America. This is a war that's going on in Europe. People are like, well, this is never going to touch us. It's not our problem. We don't need to get involved. It never usually works out that way. But, you usually end up getting involved, and it usually ends up affecting you in some way or another. Germany began a campaign of unrestricted submarine warfare in 1915. What that meant was that inside this red circle here, and pretty much anywhere inside the Atlantic Ocean that they found anybody with their sub-range, this was about where their sub-range was. Any ship in the Atlantic Ocean could be attacked and sunk no matter what flag that ship was flying. So they could attack US ships, they could attack British ships, they could attack any ships they wanted to and sink. And they were like, we're just telling you now, don't come here. This is what's going to happen. Don't whine at us if we sink your ship. We don't care. That's basically what they were saying. They had groups of submarines called wolf packs that traveled in the Atlantic, sinking many of those ships. Goodness, I'm losing my voice today. They called these U-boats. The Germans called them U-boats because in German, submarine is Unterwasserboot, which means underwater boat. So they called them U-boats for short. The Lusitania, this ship right here, was a ship that was owned by the Cunard Lines. She was originally launched on June the 7th of 1906. At that time, she was 787 feet long and she weighed 31,550 tons. And she was, at that time, the largest ship afloat. Don't lean on that. Thank you, Scott. I've got to move that over. Got to move me over. Hang on. Her sister ship was launched in 1907, the Mauritania, and she was larger and faster. But when the Lusitania was launched, she was the biggest, fastest ship there was. She claimed the blue riband, which was kind of a prize that they would give for the fastest ship sailing from Europe to America. And she was the fastest ship on her maiden voyage, the first voyage that she did from Europe to America. Her sister ship, and she fought that out. The Titanic and the White Star Line ships that we're familiar with, were the Britannia and the Titanic, were much more luxurious. The Cunard ships were faster. They were not quite as luxurious. They were fast. So that was the trade-off there, you know. In May of 1915, the Lusitania left New York for Liverpool, England, carrying 1,959 passengers and crew. And in books that I've read, a lot of these people were families. They were going somewhere at the end of the school time year. Wow, that sense made no sense. The end of the school year was in May, kind of, and they were going places for the summer. So their whole families were traveling. The British Admiralty had warned that there were submarines that were sinking ships near the Irish coast. I think in the 2 days before they sank the Lusitania, they had sunk 2 other ships in the same area. The Lusitania's captain, William Thomas Turner, felt that he could outrun any submarine, and he could. You know, Lusitania was fast, and he chose not to zigzag as it was recommended. They recommended that the ships zigzag in a random way so that a submarine couldn't line up a torpedo to sink them, because, you know, a torpedo traveled in a straight line. It didn't have the capabilities that bombs have now to be able to change trajectory. Once you shot it, it went in a straight line until it hit something or it ran out of steam. So he chose not to zigzag. So he was going in a straight line. He was going pretty fast. May the 7th, 1915, the ship lined up on what was called the Kinsale Lighthouse, because there was this little slot of water, a little channel that they had to go through, and the sub was on the other side of that channel. So for that moment, they were lined up, and the sub shot at them. They were struck by a torpedo, one torpedo. Then there was a secondary explosion, which they thought was probably the boiler or something like that exploded inside the ship. And the ship sank within 20 minutes, within sight of land. They were only about 11 miles from the coast of Ireland at the time that they sank. But for various reasons, one of the reasons being there's a sub out there. We're a little bit afraid to put a big ship out there to try to save these people. It completely sank within 20 minutes. It developed a pretty good list to one side, which means it's tilted to one side within just a couple of minutes. So the lifeboats on this side were the only, the side it was tilted towards, those were the only side lifeboats they could launch. The lifeboats on the higher side, they couldn't launch because they wouldn't go down because the ship was tilted. So out of that 1,959 people, 1,198 drowned. That included 128 passengers. I didn't put that on there. Included 128 passengers who were from America. In the aftermath of the sinking, the British government admitted that the Lusitania carried ammunition on board. They were shipping ammunition from New York to Liverpool. There was a load of ammunition on board this passenger ship. The U.S. Secretary of State William Jennings Bryan protested the sinking, but not really loudly because he was personally a pacifist, which means he didn't believe in war of any kind ever. And so he didn't want to say too much to get the U.S. drawn into war. In a letter from Winston Churchill urging Britain attempt to attract neutral ships into this area in the hopes of drawing the U.S. into the war was uncovered many years later, where they kind of thought, well, let's get some big ship over there and maybe get it blown up so that we'll draw the U.S. into the war, because that was his goal. Whether this was deliberate, we don't know. And there was evidence that the British Admiralty knew that the sub was in the area, but did not specifically warn the Lusitania. Just that, there'd been subs in the area, not that we know there's one there right now. So there was some stuff that went on. The U.S. responded to the sinking of the Lusitania. There began to be calls to get into war, but they did not enter the war at that time. Then came the Thezimmerman telegram. In January of 1917, the German foreign minister, Arthur Zimmermann, sent a telegram to Mexico, to the president of Mexico, urging an attack on the United States from the south, because U.S. is here, Mexico's right underneath. Zimmermann promised funds and material to help the Mexico attack the U.S. and promised that Mexico would regain the lands that they had lost in the 19th century, like Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, maybe even California. That wasn't discussed as far as I know, but that was, all of that land in the South that had belonged to Mexico at one point, and then they had lost. This telegram was sent through the Western Union office that was located in London, and it was intercepted by the British telegram people, turned over to the British war operations people, and eventually this information was leaked to the press. As you can see, the headline. The U.S. government kind of believed that this was maybe a made-up story, that it was British propaganda, and was just trying to get the U.S. to get into the war, until March the 29th of 1917, when Zimmermann confirmed that, he had sent the telegram, and he meant it. So now there's outrage in the U.S. that Germany is trying to recruit a foreign country to come in and invade them when we're just sitting here minding our own business. Also, another big reason that people began to really push for the entrance into the war was, remember, we talked about all of those banks and businesses and the government loaning money to people in Europe. They were beginning to be concerned about potential losses, because the only way that they were going to get their money back was if those countries that they loaned money to, most of which were England and France and maybe some in Russia, were only going to get their money back if those countries won. If they lost, that money was gone. And they started to be worried about that. And so on April the 2nd of 1917, President Woodrow Wilson went before Congress to request a declaration of war. On April 4th, 1917, the U.S. Senate voted to declare war on Germany. And then much later, in December the 7th, of 1917, war was also declared on Austria-Hungary. So the U.S. entered the war and went on to fight until 1918, when the war was over. That's all I have for you on this. It's always kind of interesting to see how these things kind of play out. Yes, I know, you're fine. If you have any questions, be sure and ask them in the comments, like and share. And I guess that's all I have for you this time. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you next time. Okay, Sully, we're done.